Come on, Lois, I think we're wasting our time here. They're obviously very committed to their beliefs.
But their beliefs are crazy, Brian. I don't know who's crazier, these people or those Seventh-day Adventists.
I'm a Methodist. We believe that the Lord is our Savior, and we remember Him by going to church and praising Him every Sunday.
I'm a Seventh-day Adventist. We believe all the same things that you believe, but we go to church on Saturdays.
What?
Okay, this video is meant to be a response video to another video on the internet where the argument is Seventh-day Adventists are delusional because they believe a Sunday law is coming. So in today's video, I'm going to show you, or we have strong evidence that there is a coming Sunday law and that Seventh-day Adventists are not delusional.
We are told that we need to understand the issue that is surrounded the mark of the beast crisis. We need to understand what the mark of the beast is so that we can not only prepare ourselves to meet the crisis, but also to help prepare others to meet the crisis. Because that is the crisis that has been making its way in darkness. That is Sunday law movement.
Consumerism. Does this sound familiar? Does this sound familiar? After we see that those people who worship the beast and are not keeping God's commandments, what do we see? Do you guys know that God is looking for men? Do we see all these things happening now? Do we see the beginning of Sunday law? Hopefully, by God's grace, we have more time. If this thing does happen 2025, that's it. It's over.
Project 2025. Have you heard of it yet? If not, I'm going to quote from it. Strap yourselves. British Foundation.
Sunday law, but this is a national Sunday law that they are advocating drafting.
There will be Sunday laws first before the signing of Sunday.
Mark of authority. The Bible teaches that this changed day of worship will eventually be enforced, and those who hold to the true Sabbath will be persecuted, just as it was during the Dark Ages. Adventists have been talking about what we're seeing right now in efforts like Project 2025 for over 150 years as something that is going to happen someday. And obviously, as of today, while I'm recording this, that day has not yet come.
We all keep Sunday. Let's do it. And a stubborn group says no, because that's the mark of the beast, and we don't want to worship the beast, we want to worship God. Could they get fed up with him?
Yes.
Could
definitely.
popular demand require that they come into line, or else?
For sure.
Will the Heritage Foundation's Project 2025 and its mandate for leadership, which include legislation incentivizing a communal day of rest on Sunday, be advanced in 2025 by the next conservative president, such as Donald Trump or Vivek Ramaswamy, who aims to lead the next Reagan revolution?
I mean, that's the first part of the video. That's pretty much what he argues here. He made mention of a number of other things in the video. So, I mean, it's an interesting video. There's some facts in here to work with. But remember, the goal of this video is to say, Seventh-day Adventists, you guys are delusional because you believe a Sunday law is coming. Are we delusional? Or have you forgotten history? Let me explain to you what I mean. It was Winston Churchill who said, those who fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Let's see why he says that, because we're going to go through history now to do a little bit of study, a little bit of reading. In 1906, when Liberty magazine was first published, every state in the Union except for California, Idaho, and then territory of Arizona had some form of Sunday blue law on the books. There were laws imposing criminal and other penalties for working on Sunday. The Sabbath of America's Protestant majority, Jews, Seventh-day Adventists, Seventh-day Baptists, and other dissenters were regularly prosecuted, jailed, fined. Why? For secular labor on Sunday. There is a stunning 1895 photo, for instance, taken in Rhea Country, Tennessee, of 8 Sabbath breakers in chain gang with other convicted criminals. Okay, so I did a little bit of research about this image. We're talking about the Seventh Adventist in chain gang. This is the first thing that came up. It's coming from Adventist Heritage Ministry. And there is another image that is connected to that as well, with a poster saying enforcing the law in Tennessee, Adventist chain gang. I think the Seventh-day Adventist Church, well, any other people, should be punished according to law for violating of the law. Reverend Dr. Moore. There it is right there. So we have this piece of evidence to work with. But not only that, let's go a little bit deeper. Remember now, those who forget history are doomed to repeat it. So that was a thing. But there's also a discussion regarding Sunday blue laws. And I'm going to go and fly backward here in a minute. But I first want you to hear what this man is saying. This is a Zionist, I think a Presbyterian minister. And listen to what he is saying here.
And you would see this theme play out. Look at this old ad right here. Vote no on Sunday movies. Boy, don't you wish that was the extent of our propositions on the election ballot, whether we go to movies or not. Here's a list of this is a current map where you can buy alcohol on Sundays and where you can't. Interestingly, if you go out to New England states, you can't buy alcohol in a grocery store on a Sunday, I don't believe. I think you have to go to a liquor store. It's a little harder to get still. You may remember blue laws, right? Movie houses would be closed. Certain businesses would be closed. And so there's sort of in the, I guess, heyday, although I'm not sure there ever was one, there was a time when American culture sort of reflected. In fact, some of these modern theologians say the day the relationship between the church and the state was forever abolished was the first time they had a movie on a Sunday afternoon at some theater in North Carolina, right? And then you knew the culture had sort of finally drifted from its Judeo-Christian moorings. But it's not all gone. You can't go to Chick-fil-A on Sunday. Hobby Lobby's not open on Sunday because they don't want any of their employees to have to work on a day of worship. And I think this is just further indicative of some of the confusion that we might have about how we are to keep the Sabbath today as God's people, how we're to be faithful.
So you're hearing the drum, right? The drum is, hey, we need a Sunday blue laws back, and they're connecting it directly to the Sabbath. So let's go a little bit deeper now. So this is Sunday Coming, the National Sunday Law. This is the first law proposed by Senator Blair Beal in 1888. This was passed on May 21st. Okay, there's a lot in this history that we can get into. In this video, I don't think I have the time to get into all the depths of this, but what this is arguing is this Sunday law that happened in 1888 started first in Boston, Massachusetts. It was vehemently opposed by a number of people. Even Sunday keeping ministers themselves were also actually imposing this. It was not national, but it could have become national. But here is the thing. There's a book here you need to read if you haven't had a chance to read this. It is called The National Sunday Law. It is the argument of A.T. Jones before the Senate Committee. So December 1888. This is good to take a listen to that. So Alonzo T. Jones began to respond to the senator's argument. He says, I present to the people known as Seventh-day Adventists. It is true that we have been entirely ignored by the other side. A very small sect, as they stated, and of the Seventh-day Baptists have been recognized, but we are more than 3 times their number, and many times their power is the real force of their work. So I'm going to play a video here that's going to kind of put a cap on that for you. This is coming from Liberty of Conscience. There's an entire series on this regarding the Sabbath and everything. But this is kind of like a play on to show you in action what that looked like, what those interaction was like. So let's take a listen to this.
In May of 1888, Senator Henry Blair of New Hampshire proposed legislation to limit secular activities on Sundays within the jurisdiction of the United States federal government. Senator Blair made it clear that the aim of his bill was to preserve the first day of the week as a day of rest and religious observance. The bill was referred to the Senate Committee on Education and Labor, where Blair was chairman. Among those who raised objections to the proposed legislation was Alonzo T. Jones,
Sir, you may speak of the power of the majority in social and civil matters, but there is no majority, however large, that can invade the territory of a man's religion. Not in this land, not under our Constitution.
Mr. Jones, you fail to recognize the right, or more importantly, the responsibility of the state to protect the welfare of the people as a whole.
Senator, it seems that you fail to recognize the clear distinction between man's responsibility to the state and his duty toward God. The first, he must render under the force of law. The second, duty to God, must be carried out only under the force of love, and that freely, voluntarily. No law can command love.
But the law of the state must protect the people to carry out their duty to God. Our Sunday law is written to ensure the preservation of the Lord's Day for the benefit of the people.
An admirable goal, Senator Blair, but completely unnecessary. Our Constitution already recognizes the rights of the people with respect to their religion. Your Sunday law would add nothing to our fundamental freedoms. It would rather add restrictions.
I'm afraid, sir, that you are blind to the realities of our age. If men owe a duty to God and do not willingly perform it, they become a corrupting influence in society.
This proposed Sunday law would have a corrupting influence by introducing force and coercion into its observance.
On the contrary, the intended effect is to enhance the Sabbath. If men do not consent to honor the Lord's Day, if their actions on that day are unrestrained by civil law, excuse me, then they trample on the very rights of those who would honor and observe the day as holy unto the Lord.
With all due respect, Senator, can you not see that your Sunday bill proposes to trample on the rights of the religious minorities? Do you really want to revert to those dark ages where church and state united to force men to violate their conscience and conform to an officially established religion?
Now, that is an unworthy comparison, sir. Our Sunday law is for the ultimate benefit of the whole society. Is it not a legitimate function of the state to legislate on behalf of the common good?
The common good of which you value so highly is not served by restricting the rights of one man's conscience in order to enlarge the rights of another. It is best served by the freedoms upon which this republic was established. State-sponsored religious coercion defies the clear intent of the Founding Fathers.
But this law provides an exemption for those who wish to worship on another day. Jews, Seventh-day Baptists, your Seventh-day Adventists, for example, who observe Saturday as the Sabbath. So where's the problem?
The problem is...
Why, just this morning, Mrs. Batum of the Women's Christian Temperance Union addressed this committee in support of such an exemption. She has conferred with representatives of 9 different groups who observe Saturday rather than Sunday, and you know how many of those approved the exemption? All of them. Every single one.
Senator, I have great respect for the temperance principles promoted by Mrs. Batum's organization, but she does not speak for my denomination on the question of exemptions.
Come now, Professor Jones, are you about to object to exemptions that would certainly benefit your group and several others?
Yes, sir. As a matter of fact, we do object. An exemption clause would not change the proposed law so as to modify our opposition. Here is the principle, Senator. If the law were just and perfect, an exemption would not be necessary. Another thing, an exemption clause is nothing other than a toleration clause in disguise. Toleration is not liberty. It is merely a form of condescension, the majority putting up with the opinions and convictions of the minority. Our Constitution guarantees not tolerance, but rights, and we claim those rights as American citizens.
Mr. Jones, without yielding the point, let me move to another question. How would you react if we were to rewrite this bill as a Saturday law, with Saturday as the Sabbath, not Sunday at all? I suppose you would take a very different position.
To the contrary, Senator. All laws that attempt to force the conscience are manifestly unchristian and unconstitutional by their very nature. Therefore, Senator, we are against every Sunday law that has ever been made since the first one enacted by Constantine to the one you are proposing now. And if you changed it from a Sunday law to a Saturday law, we would oppose it just as firmly.
Facts. That's how you argue the thing. You see, it doesn't matter. Any form of religious observance, right, where the duty to God is being legislated by the state is a problem. And I've argued before, the state has every right to enforce the last 6 commandments. Yes, honoring your father and your mother, killing, stealing, committing adultery, and all of that, that's perfectly fine. Thou shalt not covet the state by all means can enforce laws to make sure these things are followed in a country so that there is peace among mankind. But whenever the state begin to touch any of the first 4 commandments, Houston, we have a problem. And that's what the argument really is. So Christianity today, resurgence of Sunday law. But the thing is, the argument is happening. So there is the economic side of it, there is the religious side of it, and there's also the political side of this thing. But for example, the European Sunday Alliance came as a result of the 1888 pushback that took place with the Sunday Blair Bill. Most people didn't know this. There it is right there. There are multitude matches for Sunday Alliance history, including the Lord's Day Alliance, the European Sunday Alliance, the history of Sunday League football in England. Lord's Day Alliance, listen carefully, founded in 1888 by mainstream Christian denominations. The Lord's Day Alliance is a ecumenical Christian organization that lobbies for Sunday rest laws, and they still exist today. They still exist today. Adventists today speak about them, and they are still speaking the same message. Here is a video. There is their website. The Catholic Church and the European Alliance, they are united. And look at this. Listen to what the argument is. Nothing has changed, man. The best way to understand the future is to read history. Look at this.
Dear friends, as a long-term sponsor of the European Sunday Alliance, I'm proud to support the goal of ensuring the work-free Sunday. A synchronized week time of rest is very important in our fast-paced world. The work culture of modern society doesn't leave enough of time to enjoy with our loved ones. Children spend more and more time online. This not only affects their relationship with parents, grandparents and siblings, but also seriously impacts their development and mental health.
So we can go on and on. You can look them up. For the sake of this video, we got to move on. But this is what we are arguing. That's what Seventh-day Adventists are saying. And there's also some more history here as well. According to Seventh-day Press, listen to what he's about to share with you. There were also other arguments being made in the light of Sunday. In some cases, it was deemed constitutional, even though it was wrong at first. But listen, this was in 1961. Did you know about that? Take a listen.
The case McGowan versus Maryland ruled that Sunday laws are constitutional for as long as they have a secular purpose. Furthermore, the Supreme Court in the United States also ruled in the Two Guys versus McGinley and Brownfeld versus Brown that a Pennsylvania state law that required certain types of retail businesses to close on Sunday did not violate the First Amendment's free exercise clause. McGowan versus Maryland was not an isolated case. What we have seen today is a very strong legal premise upon which a national Sunday law can very easily be passed and deemed constitutional.
Yeah, it's that simple of a thing. So this is what we are learning from history. I'm not sure how many of us are willing to believe what history says. I have an entire series on the mark of the beast, and I've gone through like 9 different videos and walk one step at a time, and this is one of them. And what I've also argued is that the idea of persecution is not a new thing, especially for Christians. And the Bible tells us, I don't know why some people don't want to believe what the Bible says, but the Bible is abundantly clear. And I'm not here to fear-mongering you into doing anything you don't want to do. You don't want to believe something, you don't want to believe it, and that's perfectly fine. But you can't deny the reality of what has been and what is scheduled to take place prophetically as well. In verse 15 of Revelation 13, we are told, he had power to give life to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak, cause as many as will not worship the image of the beast should be killed. This is a powerful text. So this is being done by another power, is the lamb-like beast, and we cannot go through all of this right now. There is what is known as the image of the beast, and when you study what this is, it's a union of church and state. And we are also told that there is causing happening here, which is force legislation. The word causes, it comes from the word compelling someone to do something even against their will. We are told there's an element of worship connected to this. So when people talk about Sunday, when they're talking about mark of the beast being a chip and stuff like that. I'm like, yo, what does that have to do with worship? You know what I'm saying? So there has to be a religious law that compels worship. So there it is right there. But there's also persecution. We are told those who do not go along with it will be killed. And there is no buying and selling. So a system has to be put in place that controls the finance of this country. So there has to be some ways that we get rid of the dollar. There has to be a movement that becomes so controlled either by the government and the state so that those who do not comply do not have the privilege of buying and selling. And again, didn't they do this in 2019? At least some elements of that with COVID. Didn't you see that? And we're going to look at a video in the end that proved this point. But let's go to the Bible now to see how persecution actually took place. The only thing we can learn from history is that we learn nothing from history. That's our problem. History has been written for a purpose, and oftentimes the people who don't want to believe, they will neglect what history says. Mark Twain says history doesn't repeat itself, it often rhymes. So history has shown us from a biblical perspective. The story of Esther is an evidence for that. We are told in Esther chapter 3, we are told that the king Ahasuerus promote Haman, and Haman, as a result of being promoted, he wanted to be worshipped. So he was sat above all the princes that were with him. And we know how the story goes, right? Haman wanted to be worshipped at the gate, but Mordecai did not bow. So here is a man who wants worship, a man in political power. So he is pushing an element of religious activity. But the men of God stood against them. And as a result of that, what was it? We are told that the king's servants, which were in the gates, and said to Mordecai, why transgresses thou the king's commandment? Wow. So worship being implemented by the state was what's happening here. But guess what? Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not and did reverence, and Haman was full of wrath, anger, persecution. A death decree was passed. But we know that Esther came in, and eventually things did not go according to plan. But the point is, God intervened on behalf of his people because his people stood against it. So what you saw was one of the first 4 commandments was being violated. You never find persecution taking place where the state is messing with the last 6 commandments. This is very interesting. They never mess with the last 6 commandment to bring persecution, but whenever they touched any of the first 4, that's when persecution took place. So there was this idea of worshiping an image and an idol. But we look at this pattern. Let's look at this pattern. Church and state unite. Religious laws were enacted by civil authority. Civil law violate God's law. Thank you. God's people stood against it. And the next thing that we are told, a death decree was passed. God's people were persecuted. Then God intervened at the end. So you can get this pattern. It's not a perfect pattern, of course, but you will see it. Every time persecution is about to take place, there's a union of church and state. There is laws being enacted. There is this thing that goes against the conscience of God's people. It violates God's law, and the people of God stood against it, and then persecution was the result. And you will see that all throughout the Bible. So, and also, let's go to Daniel chapter 3, for example. We know Daniel chapter 3 is built on the foundation of Daniel chapter 2. King Nebuchadnezzar, okay, he was the head of gold, but he did not really agree with this. And also, there was some other things going on in the kingdom beside that. There was also a revolution that took place. There were other people who rose against the king. He eventually put them to death. And this was a test of loyalty to see who was really standing with him. So when he built this image, we are told that there were 3 boys who did not bow. They refused to bow to the image of the king. And as a result of that, persecution was the result. So when the king built this massive image, he called the princes, governors. Look at that, captain. So this was international. This was massive for the king because so much was involved in this. So we're talking about this went through every single state in Babylon, that everybody had to go along and bow down to the image that the king had set up. We are told he asked them to fall down and worship the golden image. And we know what happened. God's people refused to bow. Of course, they refused to bow. They said they will not go along with this. And thank God that they stood firm. There are certain Jews that have set over the affairs of the prince of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have not regarded thee nor served thy God, and worship the golden image which thou hast set up. So we know how the story read. They were brought before the king, given them the opportunity to worship, but they did not bow once again. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered, O king Nebuchadnezzar, we are not careful to answer thee in this matter. If it be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of thy hand, O king. But if he will not do so, Let it be known unto you, king, we will not serve thy God, nor worship the golden image which thou hast set up. And we know how the story ended. They were thrown in the fiery furnace, but they came out. What was going on here? This was another attack on one of the first 4 commandments. Again, this idea of worshiping an image, an idol was made. So you've seen this element all being played out. Every time persecution was to take place, there was a law being put in place. Church and state united, religious laws were enacted, God's people were persecuted, and yet they refused to bow their knees to that, and God eventually intervened. But we are told this is the same pattern you're seeing once again. I'm not going to repeat that. So now, there is another one we find also in the Bible. Daniel also praying. Yes, this was another one. We know that Daniel had some enemies who didn't like him. They hated the fact he got promoted and the fact he was a Jew. And eventually they put a law together so that they could persecute Daniel. He was faithful, and there was not an error found in him, any error. So the man lived a righteous life, and the enemies had an issue with that. And they said, we need to find a law concerning the law of his God. Look at that. The best way to catch Daniel is to put something in place that will violate his conscience and make him to violate his conscience in relationship to his God. Therefore, we got him. And guess what? We are told in history that Daniel did not go along with it. Daniel continued to pray and do what he did, even though he knew that the law was passed. He knelt before his God, with his window being open, and prayed out loud 3 times a day, as he had did aforetime. We know that the enemies didn't like that. They brought Daniel before the king, and as a result of that, he was thrown in the lion den. But God also intervened by his angels. So you get the pattern again. A religious law was passed, and as a result of that religious law, God's people were persecuted, and over again. So this is kind of how you have to study history and Bible prophecy so that you can better understand where things are gonna happen again. So this is what we all learn. Even in the Roman Empire, there was also the persecution of the church. You find this in Revelation chapter 2, and the church of Smyrna, which means sweet aroma, because of their lives having been put to death. We are told that they were persecuted, and there is the Red Horse era when you also study what this is about, that the people were being killed by Rome because of religious laws. How was it happen? Well, Rome began to go after Christianity, and there were several reasons for this, and I'm not going to say any more than that. There were religious difference, political suspicion, social unrest, and fears and ideas, and imperial edicts. So if you want to get into this stuff, I would recommend that you watch the movie Revelation, the Bride, the Beast, and Babylon. So I know I've said a lot, and that's why we recommend that you study with us this matter carefully so that you can better understand. But I want to end this video with my man, Dr. Conrad Vine. And I love how he says it. The issue is that oftentimes we will say persecution could never happen here. And then we end up by saying persecution, I didn't believe that persecution could happen here. Let's take a listen.
All the ingredients of the persecution of God's end-time people are already in place. COVID-19 has unwittingly revealed to us that the ingredients are already in place. And so based on what we are witnessing with COVID-19, what could these ingredients look like for those who are faithful to God in the final crisis of true worship, to fear God as the Creator, and worship Him on the Sabbath day, or to follow a false day of worship imposed by the papacy, that is the Sunday? What could some of those ingredients of persecution look like? Well, if we just tweak a few words here and there, this is what may well happen. We may see that those who are faithful to God will see that their civil and religious liberties will be revoked, and their First Amendment rights will evaporate. They'll be meaningless. We will see the closure of all church buildings, of all church colleges, of all church unions, administrative offices, and church entities. We will not be able to gather together for worship, for prayer meetings, or for evangelism of any kind. We may be deplatformed on social media and cancelled from public culture. We may lose our ability to put stuff online. Internet service providers may refuse to deal with us, and so we are cut off from the wider world. Our ability to buy, to sell, to bank, and to travel will be suspended for all time, that is, until Jesus comes again. Our savings, our retirement accounts, or our IRAs, our investment accounts will all be frozen, never to be used again. Our financial resources will be gone once and for all. And unable to pay for our mortgages or our rents for our homes or our businesses, we will be forced from our homes, and all of our possessions will be stripped from us, and our businesses will be taken from us as well. We will be demonized across the political spectrum and in all media. As Jesus said, and I quote from Mark 13:13, "You will be hated by all men for my name's sake." We will be hounded by mobs in the streets of social justice warriors and by state bureaucrats drunk on the absolute powers that emergency declarations seemingly give to them. Track and trace apps on our phones will trace our every movement, and our smart devices will record every word that we ever utter. The only thing I suggest to you today that stands between us and that final persecution is a political excuse to turn these ingredients upon God's faithful remnant. We are very close to the final persecution of God's faithful people. So how do we respond to the reality of this persecution that is coming this way? Well, perhaps the two most commonly heard expressions or sayings you hear relating to persecution in our world today are, number one, "Oh, persecution will never happen here," and number two, "We never thought persecution could happen here."
There you go.
These are the two most commonly heard expressions among Christians relating to persecution today. Again, persecution could never happen here, and then we never thought that persecution could happen here.
And it did. And it has. And it will take place again. But God's people are not to be fearful. But we are told, a time is coming. Let me see if I could find this for you. This is Desire of Ages 121. We are told that every earthly support will be cut off. So this is not, there he goes right there. In the last day conflict of the controversy with Satan, those who are loyal to God will see that every earthly support cut off because they refuse to break the law of God to earthly powers. They will be forbidden to buy and sell. It will be decreed that they shall be put to death. To the enemies of the church who are thinking Seventh-day Adventists are delusional, let me read something to you. Hitherto, those who present the truth of the third angel's message have often been regarded as mere alarmists. Their prediction that the religious intolerance will gain control in the United States and that church and state will unite to persecute those who keep the commandments of God have been pronounced as groundless and absurd. It has been confidently declared that this land could never become what it has been. Persecution could never happen here. Oh, I never thought persecution could happen here. The defender of the religious freedom, but as the question of enforcing Sunday observance is widely agitated. Let me read this part again. It has been confidently declared that this land could never become other than what it has been. And if you're still thinking this could never happen, all you have to do, just look at what happened recently with the COVID-19 pandemic and the mandates and the way people were treated. It should really send you a message that with the right crisis, you will see a change in our Constitution. We are told that every amendment of this Constitution will be repudiated. And if you don't think this could happen, friends, just look at history. Look at history. Look how quickly things were changed overnight and how your rights were taken away. You lost your jobs and you were fired. Why? Because you didn't want to put the thing in your body. It was that easy of a change. And you think this could not happen again? All it takes is a good crisis. And we are told never let a good crisis go to waste. Now, listen to this. The defender of religious freedom, we are told this country has always been. But here is the thing. But as the question of enforcing Sunday observance is widely agitated, the event so long doubted in disbelief is seen to be approaching. And that the third angel's message will produce an effect which it could not have had before. So, what else do you want to hear? This is the truth.